If you're a high-achieving woman who's exhausted by stress, stuck in constant conflict, and tired of being overlooked in the exact rooms where you know you were born to lead, then this podcast is for you. So here's your host, Paula V. Jane.
Welcome back to Her Boss Brain, the podcast where we decode the science of inner leadership, resilience, and mindset mastery so you can lead intentionally by activating your boss brain. I'm your host, Pallavi Jain, CEO of Pallavi Leadership Group, former HR leader, speaker, and someone who strongly believes that when women lead from within, everything shifts. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Erin Essenmacher. Welcome to the show, Erin. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. And this space is all about real conversations, sometimes a little science, and a whole lot of helping powerful women step into the leaders they already are. So before we dive in, I love to introduce you properly. So may I?
Please.
So, friends, over the last few episodes, we have met some incredible C suite women. And today we take a step higher to the people who guide and support the C suite. Erin is an award winning media executive, board leader, and former C suite strategist. She has served on boards across venture, retail, media, ESOP, and nonprofit organizations, advising leaders on governance, strategy, culture, and long term value creation. She previously served as president and chief strategy officer of the National Association of Corporate Directors, where she doubled membership, grew revenue more than fourfold, and launched the NACD directorship certification, now completed by over 1,700 board members. Erin is also a former leader at the Athena Alliance and an award winning filmmaker, bringing a powerful blend of strategy, governance, and storytelling to today's leadership conversations. And beyond her strategic brilliance, Erin also brings a deeply human perspective to leadership, one shaped by resilience, reflection, and reinvention in her own life. So welcome again, Erin. I'm just very excited to have you here today.
No, thank you. That was such a beautiful introduction. I appreciate it.
Of course, you have. I couldn't even put everything all in. There was just so much that you're doing. We're so lucky to have you. And I don't know, it's snowing here. I know you're in DC too, right? It looks
Yeah,
beautiful outside.
at least from my perspective, it's the first snow of the season here. So it's actually been really lovely outside.
Yes, and this season can be so confusing. It's part good family time, part
Yeah.
total chaos. December literally is the only month where I'm journaling about my life purpose and then panic ordering gifts from Amazon at 2 a.m., right? So what's it feeling like for you at this time of the year?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a good encapsulation, what you just said. And I think it really does get to the heart of what you talked about in the introduction. What I know this podcast is all about is how do we both think about who we want to be as leaders and how to think about our careers and stepping into the biggest, boldest version of ourselves in those careers. That's a lot of the work I do now with women executives in particular. But it's also about, for me, what does it mean? And I think this is true for everyone and should be true for everyone, is like, what does it mean to lead holistically and to think about you have a whole life to lead, right? You're not just any one of the many roles that we have and take on. And yeah, I think it's a lot like that, right? It's a lot of supporting my family and friends. I've had a couple losses in my inner circle here over the last few weeks. And so I'm just really reflecting on gratitude for myself and it's just a good, powerful reminder when you lose folks, just how short life is and how important it is to have these conversations and be thinking about how you want to spend, as one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, said, your one wild and precious life. So I'm reflecting on that gratitude, and that gratitude also extends to the gratitude I have for being able to have and make the time to show up for and support the people I care about. I think that I've also been reflecting a lot on how we think about the concept of wealth. My dear friend Elizabeth Hursterol just wrote a beautiful book about thinking much more expansively about wealth. And to me, and really, again, getting back to the essence of what this podcast is all about and your work is all about, it's like, how are we creating lives of meaning? And that certainly is true at work, but I think it means, how do we create the space to show up for the people and things that matter most to us? And that is not just work, right? And so to have the time now to be able to show up for people in a time when they really need support is really important to me, and something I'm really grateful for, and big part of how I think about wealth in my own life.
That is so beautiful and so nicely put. Gratitude is one of those things I truly feel like, especially during this time of the year. And I just made the post this morning looking at the first snow, and it just felt a blessing. And yeah, it's just very beautifully put. Thank you. And I would love for my listeners, you touched on some of that, but what's the work you're doing now? And how has your personal journey shaped the way you lead? If you want to just take the lead and tell our listeners a little bit about you, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it a little bit in the introduction. I started my career in media. I was a filmmaker and a TV producer and did a lot of media strategy and media content creation for both corporate clients and large nonprofit clients. And then I had this sort of pivotal year in 2010. I like to call one of those you make plans, God laughs years. And we can talk more about that. But the upshot of that is I made an unexpected pivot into working with boards in corporate governance through my work at NACD. I was
Yes.
ultimately the president and chief strategy officer of National Association of Corporate Directors. But I started off actually as a contractor helping to plan events and then became the director of education and was there for almost a decade and really had the honor and the privilege of helping to grow and shape that organization and its direction, but also the real privilege to meet and learn from literally thousands of board members. And that really has
Yes.
been one of the honors of my career for sure. Over the last 5 years, since I left NACD, I have been very involved with a group called the Athena Alliance. That's a membership community that supports executive women. So I was an advisor. I am a senior advisor to them. I was their chief strategy officer for a while. So I do some things to help them think about growing and scaling that organization because I just think community, and we can talk more about this, is such a
Yes.
critical part of what makes life worth living, right? When we think about community in
Exactly.
the broadest sense, but certainly in terms of our careers, it's so important supporting that. But then also I lead a board readiness course for them and also do some coaching. And then on the board side, I do board development. So I work with
Okay.
boards to think about what does effective governance look like? What does effective oversight look like? How do we manage tricky board dynamics? And then I also do some work with executive teams, helping them to understand the role of the board so that they can be a better partner to the board.
Wow. Such a rich background and portfolio with so many different variety of things you're doing and all such an impactful work. So many more nuggets we can get into this episode with you and real kind of stories, what happens in the background. I know you've navigated some profound challenges in your own life, including health. And if you feel comfortable, can you share a part of that journey with us? Because I think it's important that people understand the true essence of who you are and what you've gone through and the resilience. I was really touched by your resilience and how you've really navigated and gone to those levels in your life with everything that you have unfolded in your personal life as well. So, whatever nugget
Yeah.
you want to share.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy to share. I think you asked before about my leadership, I think philosophy or how I think about leadership, and it has been profoundly shaped by some of those experiences. So I mentioned I had this you make plan, God laughs kind of year. I thought I was going to be in media forever. I loved it. I still love it. I'm on boards of arts organizations that support kids doing media. I judge film festivals. It's something I'm really still very passionate about. But in 2010, I was at the top of my career from
Yes.
my media career. I just made an independent film that had won all these big, huge awards and was premiering and gotten a write-up in the New York Times and was having its first theatrical premiere. In the middle of that, my mom died really suddenly, which is always traumatic regardless, but my mom and I were incredibly close. So that was obviously a real blow. And right on the heels of just helping to settle her estate and support my sister, who was pregnant with my niece, her first baby at the time, I found out I had cancer. I went from top of the world, type A, to everything just stopped. I didn't
Right.
have the type of career at that point. I was a freelancer. I needed to be on a plane at a moment's notice where I could both go through treatment and work. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I just didn't work for 6 months. But it really allowed me, I just really had to be vulnerable and really focus on the healing part. And so that was very humbling for me. And it's a lot of what I help women in particular, not just women, but a lot of women executives through now, which is our identities are so tied in many cases to the work that we do. If we're lucky enough, and I know this is true for you, that if we're lucky enough to do something that we really care about and are passionate
Yes.
about, that can also be a really beautiful thing. And when that shifts, whether it's because we lose a job or we have a health crisis like I
Right.
did, or some of us might take
Yes.
time off to be a parent or deal with family things. When that shifts, it can be really disconcerting. And
Yeah.
I think it gave me such a beautiful perspective on the importance of just having that humility of remembering who we are
Yes.
for. And so when I was coming off the other side of chemo, I was really lucky. I had a super treatable form of blood cancer. I was pretty young. I was 33, 34. So I just knew if I did what the doctors told me, chances
Yes.
were pretty good I was going to be okay. And luckily for me, that was the outcome. And so I feel incredibly grateful. I literally feel like I got a second lease on life. There's something really powerful about being confronted with your mortality at a relatively young age and then coming back from that. And it's such a gift, right? Because it infuses everything. On the other side of that, I had a great colleague who I had known from the Discovery Channel who had moved into executive education. She's the one that brought me into NACD, and it set me off on this completely unexpected, but really beautiful part of my career. And I think that the gift it gave me is the humility I talked about, but also it's super clarifying, right? I had this whole list of things that were important and mattered that I was stressing about. And then the day after I found out my mom died, it's like none of that mattered anymore, right? What mattered was getting through it and supporting my sister and doing my own grieving, all those things. And then same thing when I was sick. It's like all of a sudden I didn't have the option, right? I was lucky to have chemotherapy that was available to me, and it was incredibly exhausting. It was
I
very,
can.
to realize, oh, just going out to lunch with a friend would be the thing I could do for the day. And so it really forced me to slow down. But the other thing it did was I don't ever stress anymore
Yes.
about, how to spend my time. Like it's very clarifying in terms of how to spend my time. I
Yes.
remember when my niece turned 7, my sister planned a surprise trip to Disney World for her birthday. And I don't have kids of my own, so I like to say I lean into aunting hard. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and I'm really close to all my nieces and nephews, and it's really
Yes.
important to me, those relationships. I remember having a conversation with my boss at the time about needing to take a day off, and it was the day before we had our board meeting. I was like, I'll be prepared. You'll have everything you need before I leave. And he said at first, I don't know if I want you to go. I wasn't trying to be
Wow.
cheeky. He was just, it just came, didn't have to
Yeah, you
think about
didn't.
it.
Yeah,
The next
exactly.
words out of my mouth were, oh, let me be clear. My priority is to be at Disney World with my niece for her 7th birthday. I'm
Good
very
for you.
clear that
Yeah.
30 years from now, what I'm going to regret and what I'm not going to regret. And so it's beautiful because I literally didn't have to stress about what I was going to say, how I was going to say it, how he was going to take it. It was just very clear to me. And so that's been the gift of cancer, is that clarity. And I think I've always been a pretty empathic person and leader. I definitely get that from my parents, but it's made me even more so because I just
Yeah.
understand firsthand what that's like.
That is so true. And first of all, thank you for sharing such a personal experience with all of us. It means a lot. And I think it is sometimes important when people hear that, because as an HR leader, I've been in these organizations, and many times people in the front line or in the middle management, they always think that the executives have it all together and they're perfect and their life is perfect. It's really about how you're responding to life with these challenges, with these things that happen. And it does give you that additional perspective of, we always think that these things happen to people, but not to
Right.
us. And it's a beautiful shift if you're ready and have that emotional capacity to be resilient in that moment and actually see, like you're seeing the silver lining in all of this. The other thing that, and I have some really close relatives in my life who have gone through this journey, and I know it's really demanding and hard, but as you reflect back, I think it's important to also mention, what did healing demand of you emotionally,
Mm.
not just physically? Because we all see the physical element because it's so obvious, you can see it. But the emotional turmoil of, and you've touched on some of those things, you saw the beauty and the gratitude of the things that you already had, and it gave you the sense of what truly matters. But what does it
Yeah.
take, and what if you have any nuggets that you can share, like emotionally, somebody going through, and it could be different challenges for different people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll connect it up to a couple of ways it's also shaped, because I know these are other things that we had talked about, how I show up as a leader, whether that is a people leader or
Right.
thinking about the role of the board, for example. So much of it is just unpacking a little bit more this idea of what does it mean to balance the confidence in who you are and what you know with a deep sense of humility. I think number one, emotionally, first, it's just blindsiding, right? It really is, everything stops. Both those things, right? And with my mom's death, for sure, this was true, but also with cancer, it was like I mentioned, it was almost like not an option. Like my body just wouldn't do the things that it did a month before. I was just exhausted all the time. So I had to slow down. I didn't have a choice. Like I was someone who I'm sure, like you, like many of us, and I think women especially who are having a big career, right? You have big things you want to accomplish, and you're also managing family and community responsibilities. I was always burning the candle at both ends. I was always like, I'll figure it out. I'll get sleep when I get sleep. I'll figure out how to make it all work. And in some ways, that was actually the gift of cancer. I couldn't burn the candle at both ends. I couldn't.
And you had to take care of yourself.
I remember I went in for my second chemo treatment, and I had a bunch of my husband's family in town for a race to raise money for prostate cancer because his father died of prostate cancer. And I remember I only went to half the activities they had planned. And I thought, oh, this is me taking it easy. When I went in on Monday, my blood cell counts were too low for me to get treatment. Which is a huge, big, like, no, that was a real wake up call for me early on of, oh, no, this is different. This is, I really just have to stop. And that was really hard for all the reasons we've talked about. But that goes back to that identity piece, right? Who am I when I'm not producing? Who am I if I'm not the friend that always shows up? Who am I? But the gift of that is it did help me to get really clear, like we talked about. And it really did. I did have to rely on other people in a way that a big sister raised by a single mom, I was not always necessarily so great at asking for help. So there were so many gifts to it. And I think then when I became a people leader, I had an amazing team at NACD in touch with and close with almost all of them. And we did so many, we were really able to create magic together in terms of what we did at NACD and helping to grow revenue and membership through the amazing events and experiences that we were putting together. But I think it just made me understand more, because it's not like I didn't understand this before, but having that personal experience, like, again, that we're whole people. So that part of, I think we can lose sight of when we're up against deadlines and trying to produce things. Of course, you have to have results, right? But I realized that people were going to work harder, bring their best ideas to the table. And oh, by the way, like, actually, we can have some fun doing it. It doesn't all just need to be when they felt like they mattered. And when they felt like they mattered to me as the person who was their boss in charge of their livelihood and their career, right? That's a really vulnerable thing. And I don't think we think about that enough. And I coach a lot of women who are in transition in a lot of cases because they have been let go or forced to leave a job. And it is I think we forget, like, it is a very vulnerable thing to be at the mercy of someone else for your paycheck, your career. And so I think sometimes as leaders, we can lose sight of what a responsibility that is, but what an opportunity it is as well, is to really, and I know from all the great work you're doing, Pallavi, and listening to other great episodes of this podcast, this is something that you really champion as well. But I've seen it firsthand. This is not just like fluffy, feel good. Like I know what it means when people know that they care about you, they show up differently.
Absolutely. And I think thank you for saying that, because I think a lot more executives need to hear that, because, and the point you mentioned, I do want to reiterate that this is something I think everybody needs to understand. It is truly important to have that inner clarity to know what truly matters to you. And once you have that, like, real magic happens in your life. You feel, okay, I don't have enough time, but somehow you create time for things that actually matter, because now you are clear what actually matters. You've talked about people leadership skills and how when you actually truly care for other people, how people come out of their shell and they feel valued, and the way they are responding, the way they are doing their work changes completely. You've mentioned this here a little bit, but I'll still pose this question if there's anything else you want to add. You have guided leaders other than your own journey through disruption and crisis externally. What inner muscles does a leader need to build to navigate those moments? Because I think that is truly important, because everybody can be great when everything is going great, but it is those moments that really shine what kind of leader you have.
Yeah, such a great question. And it gets to the other piece that's more on the board side of how my personal kind of journey, I've seen it since then, like the things that I learned by going through cancer where they show up in other places. So for example, I've served on a lot of boards. I've worked with a lot of board members. I work with a lot of boards now. And I'm also a contributing editor to Directors and Boards magazine. So I write a lot of articles around trends in governance and how boards should be thinking about them. And one of the articles I wrote in the last 6 months was about, the premise of the article was, what skill sets are boards looking for now? And so I picked 4 directors who I knew were really super thoughtful and really accomplished and who I respected, and just posed that question to them. I think the editor-in-chief maybe thought, and I thought maybe we're going to get into, oh, how important are their technology skills? How
Yeah.
important are financial skills? To a person, they did not talk about what you bring into the boardroom, and that's not important, but that the most
Yes.
important thing is how you show up. And one of the other things underneath that everyone unprompted touched on is how important humility is. That you come in, by definition, you would not be chosen for a board if you weren't accomplished, if you weren't smart, if you didn't
Of
have the
course.
background.
Yeah.
And you might know a lot, but you don't know how things work at this company. You're still new to this company and this board and these dynamics. And so coming in and figuring out, and I think it is both an art and a science. And I think even the best directors will tell you that they're honing it continuously over their careers, like we do with
Yes.
anything, but is coming in with the confidence and the clarity in your point of view that got you there, balanced with a healthy dose of humility around, I don't have all the answers. And actually, if I show up as if, oh yeah, I've seen this before, I've got this all figured out, it can actually be harmful because what
Oh,
you're doing
yes.
is creating blind spots or showing up with blind spots where you miss risks, right? One of the other pieces is when you think about the board, boards, of course, have a lot of power, right? But
Mhm.
it's really more power through influence, right? Because boards are not there
Yes.
to run the company. They're there to be this oversight and
Or like
advisory body.
advisors. Yes. Thought
Exactly.
partners.
And so the most important tools you have in your toolbox as a board member are asking really good questions to get to the heart of what's most important, which sounds simple. And I'll tell you from my own experience, and again, talking to the
It
most
doesn't happen
accomplished
very
directors,
often.
no, it is a thing that they are constantly honing.
Yes.
So asking really good
So
questions,
being curious, if I may, right?
being
So
curious.
honing that curiosity with humility. I think that's where that fine line is.
Yeah. And I think humility is another way to think about being curious, right? Because
Yes.
by definition, if we show up curious, we're saying, I don't have it all figured out. And when we
Exactly.
are executives in these corporate spaces, like there's a lot of incentive for us to, or this feeling that we need to show up as if we have it all figured out.
Yes.
And I think it's very counterintuitive, but it's important. And so those definitely link all the way back to this experience I've had in my own life, but it's been so interesting to watch it play out again and again, because I hear this from every leader I admire. Every leader
Yes.
I admire has done amazing things and is really impactful and has a great track record, but they have had major stumbles that
Yep.
they've learned from and that they're not afraid to talk about. They wear them like a badge of honor. They're confident enough in what they've done and what they do know, and they know how important it is to be able to admit that you don't know what you don't know, and they can show up and hold both those things. So I think that's certainly true in the boardroom, but as any kind of leader at any level, holding both those things is important. And it's knowing, okay, having the confidence on one hand. Sometimes when I'm working with younger executives, I always say to them, because this is the advice I got, right? When I was first programming things at NACD, I wasn't an expert in compensation policy or internal audit. So when I was working with speakers, it's you're an expert on the topic that you're an expert on, but I'm an expert on our audience and what resonates
Yes.
with them and how to present this information because I've done this enough and I've gotten
Yes.
enough feedback. And so there is a part about having confidence in what you have gained mastery over or the experience you have. And so sometimes it is, especially earlier in our careers, really owning that. And I think even later in our career, sometimes it's like really owning it with your whole chest, right? So that's one
Yes.
piece. But the flip side is also none of us do anything in life of consequence alone. None of us. Even long distance runners, or you think of the most lonely sports, they have a team of
Yes.
coaches and conditioners and different people, nutritionists behind them. And so I think it's just helpful to remember, okay, when things are, like you said, go sideways or aren't necessarily going so great, this is where I think the relationships that you cultivate and the importance of cultivating those relationships as a form of self-care for your career, a form of thinking about what it means to be an effective leader and executive at any level. Those relationships are so important because you are never going to know everything. You're not supposed to know
yes.
everything. And so when things go sideways, I think the most important thing as a leader is, do you know who to call? Do you know where to ask
Yeah.
for help? Do you know where to go to get the answer? And you can't cultivate and know that if you're also holding tight to the idea that you're supposed to have it all figured out.
Yes. It sounds very simple, but there are very less executives who actually do that. And so, what are organizations actually suffering the most right now from your perspective? And is there a gap between what executives think and what employees experience? Because, yeah, I have my own opinion on that, but I would love to hear yours.
Well, obviously, it's broad, right? And every company is a little different. But I think in general, I do think there is this piece about really what does it mean to think about your employees not just as human resources, but as partners.
Yes.
And what is this goal that we're trying to accomplish together? And how do you create a culture where your team can be partners in that? Are you supporting professional development? I think that's especially true as we think about the way that work is changing so
Hmm.
profoundly. It has been changing so profoundly for a while, but
Yes.
especially with emergent technology and AI and things like that. We're in such a huge shift right now that I think none of us fully understand the implications of, but I do know a big piece of it is how are we not just relying on the technology, but really thinking about the people and enlisting them as partners and developing them as partners and whatever that looks like. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think there is, let's just take the AI conversation because it's so top of mind. I think there is a risk on one side of companies feeling like head in the sand, this isn't going to apply to us. I think, again,
Yep.
getting curious about how might this apply to us? Where could this be helpful? And then communicating that to your employees in a way that is transparent and clear, but also enlisting them and helping to figure that out. I think sometimes we can think of this technology as like this independent entity, and maybe someday we'll be there, right? We hear a lot of talk about that, but that's not where we are now. And we forget
Yes.
sometimes that even the intelligence that AI has is human derived, right? And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
how
Yeah.
are we both thinking about not head in the sand, but also not rushing to embrace it out of a sense of fear? I think that's another thing, just from a leadership standpoint in general, is there can be this knee-jerk reaction of we have to react. And I think the best boards understand this, and I think the best leaders understand this, which sometimes taking a beat is the best thing you can do. And I think to your
Yes.
point about the disconnect between leadership and maybe the mainline employees is a lot of times they actually know better than we do the best thing to do because they're the
Absolutely.
ones in it,
Yes.
right? They're talking to customers, they're in our systems,
Yeah.
and so I think the more that we can enlist them as partners, really grounded in a clear sense of what are we all doing here? What are we trying to
Yeah.
accomplish? What does success look like? I think more companies and leaders would be well served to adopt more of that mindset in terms of tackling some of these big challenges.
Yeah, and I think this is so important. It does take me back to my HR days where I would often say, leadership would say, people need to be more driven. And then employees would say, we're exhausted, no one sees it. So neither was wrong. They were just operating from different emotional truths, if I may say
Yeah.
that, because the gap isn't strategic. It's really human. Because, and I truly feel this is where like leading from within becomes critical because when leaders haven't regulated their own stress, their own ego, fear, insecurity,
100%.
urgency, right? All those things that you're talking about, this is what keeping them to not do them, of being open, of being vulnerable, of being curious. And then they push that pressure downward instead of creating clarity and safety for themselves. But when leaders ground internally first, I have seen now firsthand, they communicate from intention rather than reaction. So that's the mindset mastery, responding from awareness, not autopilot. And people
Yes.
rise to that.
Yeah, I think that's so wise and so true. And again, another gift of going through the health challenges that I did is you really develop a much deeper appreciation for your body and what it does for you when you all of a sudden it can't do those things
Yes.
as well. And I just started transcendental meditation this year, and it has been such a game changer. And I also am reminded as you're talking about, I had a coach once who I don't know, I can't even remember what, like these things that we get. I was spiraling about something at work, and she
Yes.
just stopped me and she said, let me ask you this. When was the last time, how much sleep did you get last night? How much water did you have to drink today? And when was the last time that you ate? She basically said 90% of what is vexing us can be at least halfway mitigated by making sure that
Yes.
and it's
Yes.
just another way of what you're saying, like how are you taking care of yourself? And if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you be thinking about and prioritize? Then it's
You
easy to
can.
go, I'm not even taking care of myself. Why should I worry about these guys not having work-life balance? We should all be striving for that more, right? We
Yes.
should all be thinking about what is it, which I talk to companies and boards a lot about long-term value creation and not just
Yes.
thinking about value.
Thank you for saying that. Because everybody is seeing so short term, right? Nobody is seeing that these things literally directly impact your bottom line and your revenue.
It's all different versions of the same conversation. And I think
Yes.
to your point, the more that you are willing to embrace a more humanistic approach to leadership, if your employees are getting burned out, you can usually intervene. I had an amazing partner on my team, was my number two. I really just thought of us as arm in arm.
Yes.
Donna Vaught, she's one of the best meeting planners I've ever met in my entire career. And I would always say to her, like, you need to take your vacation this year. Like really encouraging her to take care of herself, because we had a very demanding job and schedule. We were on the road probably half the month, running dozens of high profile, high touch events a year. And so I was in a part of the business where burnout is really easy. Yes, we're going to these really nice hotels, but people are working 18-hour days sometimes when we're on the ground
That's
there.
crazy.
I was able to do that, and we were able to be successful in all the other metrics that business tracks, because I also understood this is part of high performance. This is part of building a strong team, is understanding when people need a break, when they need to leave a little bit early. Back in those days when we were going into an office to take care of stuff for their family, or like all of those things are not nice to have or separate. It is all part of the same mindset of like, how do we create an environment where people are thriving here, which by definition means that the work is thriving and the organization is thriving and the mission is thriving.
So I have to ask you this, because as you're talking, this is like going in my head. So we talk a lot here about leading from within and my ATM framework, and you're stepping in around that. So I want to ask you this question, that in my work, like I said, I call it the ATM framework. So arrive in the present, take responsibility, and make conscious choice, right? Those are the three steps. So which of these resonate most with your journey, and why? And again, there's no right answer here. You've mentioned some of these already, so that's what prompted me to ask you this question. But I'm just curious, which one showed up most for you?
Yeah, it's such a great model. I love them all. I'm sure you hear that a lot. It's a great frame. I would say the arrive present resonates with me because it's something I really struggle with.
It's the hardest step.
But it is really important. It's part of that whole idea of taking care of yourself. I think that the taking responsibility part is critical. And I think back to this idea of what's the disconnect between people and teams. I think when your team knows that you are willing to take responsibility and say, the buck stops with me, they respect you more and they're willing to be more transparent with you, more open to you. It's like when there's a problem on the team, if you're the leader of the team, it's ultimately your responsibility. Now, that can look a lot of different ways, right? In some cases, it may mean that some team members aren't the right fit anymore, but that's still your responsibility, right? And the more that your team sees that, they trust you. The more that the people that are senior to you, that you report into, see that, they trust that you're taking responsibility. But when it comes to the team you're leading, I think it builds credibility, it builds trust. It's an important part of integrity. And then when they know that, I think it opens the door to say, okay, this is ultimately my responsibility as a leader, but this isn't working. So let's figure it out together. And I think it's easier to have that conversation in a really effective, constructive way when you're not starting from whose fault is this? Because it certainly isn't mine.
And I would just add to that, that in this space, we also talk about taking responsibility for yourself as well. And that responsibility also means your ability to respond, which sometimes could be no action also. But it is about not finding fault and not looking at the problem, but really looking at the solution and what can I do about that? And what truly matters in this situation, what we have really talked about in this episode from the get-go. When boards bring you in, right? What do they think is broken? And tell us honestly, what's actually broken?
I think most boards in general rarely feel like things are broken. And I think in general, that's right. I would say that most of the work I do is really, what does it mean to go from good to great? Or there's usually the board is doing really well in a lot of areas, but they may be struggling in one area. Maybe it's board dynamics. Maybe it is the board and C-suite being able to work more effectively together as partners. Yes, the board is in this oversight role, and that's important, but also the board is really working in a lot of ways in partnership with the management team to get information they need to problem solve, that kind of thing. So I would say that's a big part of what I do, is helping the board understand, okay, what is my oversight role here? What does it look like to provide effective oversight of strategy, given it's always very tailored to the company? the industry, where they are in their life cycle. We'd say in the board course I teach, if you've seen one board, you've seen one board because there's so
Yes.
many nuances.
Yes.
So a lot of it really has to do with understanding the business that board is overseeing first and foremost. And then, okay, so what does it look like? Sometimes it's helping the board understand what does effective oversight look like here. So we're not getting too far in the weeds, but how do we do
Yes.
that in a way where we are getting the information we need?
So being more conscious of what's really
And I think,
happening in
and
the industry.
understanding that through the lens of what are the
Yes.
trends shaping the industry. There's so much going on right now that is really dynamic from a risk and strategy
Yes.
standpoint.
Oh, talk about change. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was so powerful, Erin. And it reminds me of why I started this podcast again, because I'll share with you an example quickly for my friends here. I say that often in my programs too. Sometimes women come in saying, I need confidence or I need communication tools. But what we actually uncover in the workshop is that it's not about confidence sometimes, it's about permission to use their voice, permission to have inner clarity, take space, be seen. Because I
Absolutely.
do think the presenting problem, which everybody talks about, is skills, but the real problem is identity, which you have talked about a little bit. And we both know that revenue matters. At the end of the day, that's important, but there's a real cost of burnout in high achieving teams, and it directly hits the bottom line. So, have you seen ways that investing in inner growth, we have talked about inner clarity a lot here, but really in your inner growth and well being actually strengthens performance metrics? And I would love if
Absolutely.
you can share a quick example with us.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about this concept of self-care for your career. I touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but I'll give a couple
Yes.
of examples. I think what I see a lot, and exactly to your point, Pallavi, is women who are so focused on building their career, they're kind of heads down, that they
Yes.
forget to build their network. And we forget this job could go away tomorrow. Who do I have to lean on? Who can I bounce things off of? So I always encourage women as early as possible in their career, get a nonprofit board. Even if you never serve on a corporate board, it's a great experience. Inherently broaden your professional circle. So you're meeting people in other industries and other companies. So I teach whole classes on this and do coaching around this, but there's a whole thing we talk about around what's your strategy for building your network, both within your company, but also outside your company, because that also helps you to build influence, which we
Yes.
can be doing from the beginning and should be doing from the beginning of our career. So that's number one. And I think to your point, number two, the other thing we talk about a lot is what does it mean to, how do you want to be seen as a thought leader? What do you want to be
Mm-hmm.
known for? What are things that you care about? And I think sometimes, to your point, we wait for permission for someone else
Yes.
to tell us that we are a thought leader or we're allowed to be. The way that you become a thought leader is by putting your thought leadership out. And so
Yes.
that can be as, you don't have to be someone who's written a book or is on a podcast. That can be as simple as going on LinkedIn once a week and posting an article or a podcast or something that resonated with you and saying, as someone who is a leader in fill in the blank, logistics, as a
Yes.
CMO, as someone who's a product person, whatever it is that you are doing and want to be known. This was really
Yes.
interesting to me. Here was one nugget I took away from it. If I were a senior leader here or a board member, here's a question I would be asking. It is amazing to me, and I can give you dozens of examples of people who are doing this and are disciplined about it. And we just start
Yes.
to see them that way because they are
That's right.
they're just doing it. And so I think to your point about permission is, it's so spot on and so astute. And so I think the next step is then understanding, where are we waiting for permission? Where are the places we're giving our power away? I certainly appreciate that there are some rooms that we're in where the power dynamic is such that maybe you don't feel as comfortable speaking
That's
up. But
right.
I think if you look at and take responsibility for your career holistically, it's not about always having power in that room at that point in time. It's about, how am I thinking about myself as a leader? How do I want other people to see me? And how am I building allies that can help me, not just in the role I'm in now, but throughout my career?
So let me bring this all back, which is all amazing points. I'm trying to recap this for our audience. So one, you talked about being intentional, if I may use that word, of how you're showing up for the network, and you're being intentional about creating those connections because they go a long way. And I also believe you become the person depending on who you surround yourself with. So I think it really impacts who you're talking to, who you're connecting with. And you also mentioned that inner clarity of knowing what is it that you're creating outside. And because consciously or unconsciously, your kind of personal brand is getting created, so why not do it consciously, right? So
That's
those are the two things that stood out to me as you were talking about it. And I want to be mindful of our times, but I do want to touch one more quick thing before we
Yeah.
close out our episode is technology. We have weaved that into our conversation, and I know that's so upfront on so many leaders. So I would love to get your take on because technology is evolving faster than human behavior. So what mindset shifts do leaders need to make to lead well in an AI driven world? Or what skills will matter more than technical knowledge? I think it's very important to touch on that.
Thank you for the question. I think it's such an important thing for us to be centering and talking about in a very
Yes.
thoughtful, strategic, intentional way. So I really appreciate it. I don't know if you use this exact framing, but the idea of EQ and how
Yes.
important that is. And I think that is another piece that is, we've talked about it in terms of leadership. It's certainly a critical part of being successful as a board member. But I think that is going to continue and is going to grow in importance as we look at facing this AI driven future that we're all contemplating now and what that looks like. I think EQ is going to be important in terms of how we design and deploy AI, and was co-chair and co-author of a AI playbook that Athena put out with a bunch of amazing women technology and people leaders. And this is a lot of what we talked about, is how you balance the technology with the people, right? Again, how are we communicating to employees? How are we thinking about and thinking deeply about where is this something that a machine or artificial intelligence should be taking the lead on? Where is this something where we need a human taking the lead? What does that machine human partnership look like? Again, I know these are things that are being talked about, but are they really being thought about deeply? So that's something that I would encourage everyone who's in this conversation, which on some level is all of us. How are we thinking about that? One of the things that was really, I'll just share it quickly, it really resonated with me, and I just really respect her perspective so much. And I love that she brought this forward. But there's a woman, Liat Benzor, who's an amazing technologist, has had an amazing
Yes.
career in technology, early development of AI at some big tech companies, and now she's a board member. And
Okay.
she's writing a book where she's talking about that actually in this age that we're going into, that people from, I'll say, more marginalized or traditional under promoted communities, people of color, women, are going to be better positioned, best positioned in this AI driven world, because we've grown up with finger quotes in our professional careers, having to hone these skills about where are the power dynamics in the room, listening for the thing that's not being said, like really honing our EQ.
Yes.
A lot of us have
Yes.
really had to do that to be successful. And that those are exactly the things in this AI driven future where how we human and how we
Yes.
show up with our human lens and that EQ and that sort of empathic piece is going to be more important than ever, because
Wow.
those are the things that the machines can't do well. And so I think we would all be really well served as leaders to be thinking deeply about that piece.
That is such a neat perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's some definitely stir a lot of questions in a lot of people's mind as they hear that, because honestly, I had one of those realizations myself while I was designing the curriculum for my next cohort, which is next month. And I paused and I wondered, like, decision making, influence, inner clarity that we've been talking about still matter in an AI world? And the answer was even more, right? Because it's so true. I have to reiterate here that AI can summarize data, write an email, but it can't walk into a tense room and sense who feels unheard.
Right.
It cannot choose courage over perfection or build trust or hold space for another person
That's
and
right.
lead with intuition and presence. So I really want to say this again, that AI delivers output, humans deliver meaning. And
That's
meaning
right.
is what moves people. We have been talking about community, we've been talking about connection. So the question becomes, are we upgrading our tools faster than we are upgrading our inner operating systems?
I
And
love
and
that.
that's really what my work, because it truly matters. And a lot of women really wait to also claim their power until life forces them into transformation through crisis, through loss, through illness, disruption, or relationship dynamics, conflicts, you name it. Let's also close with this. What would you say to the woman who hasn't had that defining moment but wants to activate her inner clarity now?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. I would tell them to listen to your podcast. I think you have so many great conversations around this. I really have enjoyed getting to hear so many of them. I think it's so much what we've been talking about. I think it's just, we can forget sometimes, especially if we're in these corporate structures, that we are bigger than our job description, right? The company gives you a set of bullet points and you have to deliver on
Yes.
those because that's the job they've hired you to do. But number one, we are so much bigger than that. So how are you thinking bigger than that and thinking beyond just the role that you're in? And that goes back to some of the things we've talked about in terms of really taking charge of your career in these different ways. I think that's critically important, and investing in that, whether that's like a program like the one you're running, whether that's getting a coach, whether that's joining a community, joining a membership community, whether it's in your industry or somewhere else where you can build some of these connections. That's number one. But number two is, again, going back to my favorite Mary Oliver quote and what you were saying about taking care of ourselves, like, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And I think remembering it is ultimately up to you to have the life that is fulfilling to you, and no one is going to do that for you. And also, don't give that away. Again, that is the gift of being a cancer survivor, is that I really have a much deeper appreciation for what that means. And so really stop to think about what that is on a regular basis, whether that is you do that through journaling, consider a meditation practice, but what is it that you do to really get back into your own body and your own heart and make sure that the decisions you're making are heart and spirit led in terms of what is best for you, because only you know the answer to that. And so I think just again, to your point about permission, we can forget sometimes, and when we're in these high pressure spaces, that like we need to take that responsibility for ourselves.
I love that. So beautifully said. And this reminds me again, that's exactly why we're having conversations like these with wonderful, amazing, empowered women like you, because the future won't belong to the most efficient leaders. It really wouldn't, but the most conscious ones. And that's the conversations we have just had today. And if you're listening and thinking, I need to build those muscles, that's the work, Erin, I do my Lead from Within workshops at organizational level. And I'm also launching the Rewired Women Journey for all of you exclusively. So applications are open now. You can check the links below in the show notes. Step in if you're ready to lead from within, not just keep up. And lastly, Erin, I do want to give you a couple minutes to talk about if there is any specific message, call to action, or advice you have for the women listening to us today, and what is the best way they can reach you or get the support from you with all the amazing work that you're putting out there.
Yeah, first of all, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Erin Essenmacher there, so I'm easy to find. And I'm always happy to connect with other amazing leaders and have conversations. And that's number one. Number two, I do some of my coaching work through the Athena Alliance. If you're a senior leader with more experience under your belt, check them out, consider joining the community. But I also do coaching and board development and all those other pieces through Leadership Elevated in partnership with Rochelle Campbell, who I worked with for years at NACD and just adore. Speaking of building community and advocates and champions. So those are two places, the leadershipelevated.com. It's leadership-elevated. And then please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect and to chat.
Well, thank you again for your time. I just absolutely love this conversation. I can keep going with you, but we have to be mindful. And to all my friends here, just to bring it all together, leadership isn't just about the roles we step into. It's about the inner capacity we build to hold them with clarity, courage, and care. Those were the three words that came to my heart and mind as I was listening to Erin today. And if today's conversation stirred something in you, that's your invitation to start leading from within right now. You are in charge of your life. Be the boss and be on self-start.
So that's it for today's episode of our Boss Brain podcast. Head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 private VIP day with Pallavi herself. Be sure to head on over to her bossbrainpodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Pallavi's gift and join us next time.